Hi friends, I'm the Mythkeeper. Welcome back to my channel. This week, I'm trying something a little bit different. I'm putting myself on camera, which is totally nerve-wracking. We'll see how I like it. We'll see how you like it. If you like it, let me know in the comments below. So, this is my third video in my Pathfinder series. The first video was about the lore and history of the world of Golarion. My second video was about choosing the adventure path that's right for you. And this third video assumes that you know a little something about the history of the world, that you've chosen your adventure path, and you're trying to decide what character to play. So where I'm going to go deep this video is on the ancestries of Pathfinder. Now there are a ton of ancestries to choose from, and they're all really deep and complex. So I'm going to spread this series of videos, I suppose, over a couple of videos. And the first two will be focused on the humans of Golarion, who have the richest and most detailed history. The next videos will be focused on elves, dwarves, gnomes, and then eventually I'll get to halflings, half-orcs, and half-elves. And who knows, maybe if I've got enough time, I'll get to some of the weirder ancestries as well. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Humans cover the entirety of Golarion. In the parts of the world where adventures are to be had, you can be sure you will find humans there. For new players, humans are an excellent choice, because as human beings ourselves, they are an immediately relatable ancestry to choose. For more experienced players, humans continue to be a good choice, because humans are at the center of the geopolitics of Golarion, and selecting a human character immediately gives you interesting story hooks for your GM to take advantage of. Humans come in a variety of ethnic groups, and for better or worse, belonging to these ethnic groups confers along with it a good deal of political and social context. If you're playing a campaign set in Korvosa, for example, non-player characters will react very differently if you're ethnically Chelish, ethnically Varisian, or ethnically Shoanti. They'll react differently again if you're from somewhere even further abroad. Playing a human presents you with a number of options. To understand some of this context, you'll need to know a little history, and we'll need to go back to the map. This video will hopefully give you that context so you can hone in on your character concept. Before I do that, though, let me first suggest that regardless of which ancestry you're thinking of playing, always go to the Adventure Path's player guide for additional context about the game and the themes that that game explores. There's no better resource, really, for helping you make the right choices. I'd also encourage you to talk with your games master through your options and see if there's anything that particularly resonates with them as well. When a GM is excited about the character you've chosen to play, it's almost always a better experience for both of you. Alright, that being said, let's start in the northwest region of the innersea and move east and south, covering the ethnicities that are native to those regions as we go. Of course, human characters can be from any ethnicity, regardless of what land they call home, so it doesn't matter which people are indigenous to your game, you can play someone from any ethnic group. In the northwest of Avestan, you can find the lands of the Linorm kings. The nation was founded in -624, when, at the mouth of the Rhymeflow River, Sabjorn Armfang killed the first Linorm, a gigantic serpentine dragon, in single combat. Thereafter, he declared himself the first Linorm king, and set up his capital by founding Karlsgard. Even to this day, to become a Linorm king, a contender must defeat a Linorm in single combat, and carry the creature's severed head through the gates of the city they wish to rule. Legends state that one day a Linorm king will rise to unite all the regions of the lands of the Linorm kings, and that this High King will need to slay the father of all Linorms, Fafnir, to claim that title. Today there are 5 Linorm kings who rule this region. Ingemundr, the Unruly, leads Broken Bay. Nanku leads Icemark. White Estrid rules the Iron-bound Islands. Ostog the Unslain controls Southmoor, and Thera Ash-Eyes controls the Thanelands and the capital of Karlsgard. The people that populate these lands are called the Ulfen, and they speak a language called Skald. They commonly worship Erastil the Hunter, Torag the Forger, Gorum the Warrior, or Desna the Dreamer. They are described in the source material as tall, with pale to ruddy skin, with blonde, light brown, or red hair, which is often worn in braids. They are also noted to be skilled sailors and warriors. It should be obvious by now that the Ulfen are a stand-in for Vikings, or Norse, of the real world. Despite originally hailing from this remote region, it is possible to play an Ulfen character regardless of where your adventure path is set. For a start, the Ulfen were once feared along all of Avestan's coastlines for the fierce and merciless raiding conducted in their longboats. So the descendants of Ulfen can be found all along the coastal regions of Avestan, but especially in Varisia. Secondly, much of the Northlands were once part of the Linorm King nation. Before the Winter War and the establishment of Irisen in 3313, the Linorm King's lands stretched to the borders of the realms of the Mammoth Lords, and in some areas beyond it. Ulfen people settled into distant Iobaria, which lies beyond the eastern border of Brevoy, along the Lake of Mists and Vales. In the west, King Ulvas of Karlsgard founded the colony of Valenhall in distant Arcadia. Meanwhile, much further south, because of an almost 1,500-year-old compact between the nation of Taldor and the Thanelands, exceptional Ulfen warriors often make the long journey south to become sworn to the protection of the Grand Prince or Princess of Taldor, as a specially trained group of bodyguards called the Ulfen Guard. This is inspired from the real-world history of the Viking Guard, who served as bodyguards and protectors to the Byzantine emperors of Constantinople. Finally, even further south, one of the lords of the Pirates' Council of the Shackles, a fierce Ulfen woman named Wide Olga, captains a brigantine called the Beckoning Nereid, sailed by an all-Ulfen crew, and controls the port of Oyster Cay. A number of Ulfen can be found there, either directly under her service or trying to make names for themselves on the pirate islands themselves. If you decide to play an Ulfen, you should consider that other humans will instinctively assume you are a capable warrior. But they might underestimate your intelligence, because the Ulfen are often regarded as a savage people by outsiders. For character concepts and for naming ideas, the best place to go is probably directly to Norse mythology. Ulfen, like the Norse people they are based on, didn't traditionally use family names. Instead of a family name, consider using a matrilineal or patrilineal naming convention. For example, Hildi Karlsdottir, or Einar, son of Harald. Other Ulfen may take a second name later in life that describes them, like Hagar the Bold or Sigrun the Quick. Let's go back north now. Among the Linorm kings, one alone is not Ulfen. That is Nanku of Icemark. He is Varki, and the Varki came south from the crown of the world, where we find a broader ethnic group to which the Varki belong, called the Erutaki. The Erutaki are hardy whalers and mountaineers who inhabit the crown of the world, particularly along the crown's coastline, the foothills near the barrier ranges, and near lakes in the southern tundra. Many are nomads who follow whale migrations, and a few form permanent settlements. They are defined by a clan structure, and both customs and social beliefs vary widely by clan. There is a treacherous path across the crown of the world that leads directly to Tianxia, and it is believed that the original Erutaki and Varki were exiled Tian people before they settled in the frozen north. The real-world analogues for the Varki and the Erutaki are the Inuit people. And if you are considering playing one, I would suggest reading up on real-world Inuit lore and history for some inspiration in the game world. The Varki, and certainly the Erutaki, are not as well traveled, so it's much less likely that in foreign lands other humans will be familiar with your people, and therefore have predisposed opinions about them. In all likelihood, in southern lands like Andoran or Taldor, a Varki may be confused for a Tian person, or possibly an ethnic Kellid. Speaking of Kellids, let's continue our journey across the Northlands, now moving east along that north ridge of Avestan. The realm of the Mammoth Lords is primarily populated by a people called the Kellids. But the Kellids are not just natives to this northern land. They were, in fact, the original native people across almost all of Avestan, at least before the spread of the old Taldan Empire, and later the spread of the Chelish Empire. Because they covered such a wide area in the ancient world, Kellid is a broad category of related peoples, tied together by a shared language and history. The Kellid peoples include the Yerktiri, the native people of the realm of the Mammoth Lords, and the embodiment of Kellid culture to ignorant outsiders. The Kellid here are scattered across the land and are almost all nomadic. The realm has no capital, or even cultural gathering place. Its people spend the year following the herds of great beasts, like mammoths, mastodons, aurochs, or even dinosaurs, across the land, and only make their way to the cities when they must. Its towns mostly exist to serve foreign travelers. The Kellids of this region war against giant tribes almost constantly, but are known to take in captured giant children and raising them as their own. Having a giant in one's tribe is a sign of power among the Mammoth Lord's followings, and the children are raised as honored members. The Sarkorians. East of the Mammoth Lands is the historical realm of Sarkoris, a savage land of fiercely painted warriors and witches. It was established in 3672, after the Kellids there defeated the frost giants of the North Mounds. This realm lasted until the death of Aradin and the opening of the World Wound in 4606. The Sarkorians were forced to flee their land in great numbers when it was overrun by demons. The proud survivors of Old Sarkoris are now in diaspora throughout central Avestan. Most Kellids near the World Wound, or in Mendev, Ustalav, and Numeria, are Sarkorians. The Palakari. The Palakari are the least stereotypically barbaric of the Kellids, and they make up the majority of the humans in Druma. Because of Taldan occupation, most Palakari are mixed-race people, comprising predominantly of Kellid, but also of Taldan descendancy. Many Palakari even identify more as ethnically Taldan, depending on their particular upbringing. Finally, the Isgeri. This is the predominant Kellid ethnic group of southern Avestan, before the coming of the Taldan. Though Isgeri lands were largely absorbed by the Taldan Empire, they remained more isolated and mixed less with the conquering Taldans. They appear more traditionally Kellid than the Palakari in the north, and they still hold on to their traditional cultural practices. Kellids are typically a brawny, dark-haired people, tanned and bearing eyes of black, blue, or gray. The Kellid language is called Halit, and they traditionally, though not exclusively, worship the god of battle, Gorum. Kellids owe less to real-world ethnic groups than they do to the writings of Robert E. Howard. Conan the Barbarian serves as the primary inspiration for the Kellids. In Howard's book, Conan is a Cimmerian, which was a real-world ethnic group of Indo-European nomads that lived around the year 1000 BC. But they left no written records of themselves, so records of them are largely derived from Assyrian or Greco-Roman records, who in turn viewed them as a barbaric warrior people. Because Kellids are an indigenous but displaced people in much of these lands, there are a lot of interesting thematic stories to explore by playing a Kellid. Unless your adventure path takes place in Numeria or the Mammoth lands, as a Kellid, you are playing someone who is perpetually an outsider in their own lands. Though Kellids form their own small communities on the fringes of civilized spaces, they are too few in number not to regularly interact with settled Varisians, Taldans, or Chelish people. Playing a Kellid is to choose the path of being viewed as a savage and a primitive by the people who now occupy your ancestral lands. In eastern Varisia, we see a similar experience being had by an ethnic group called the Shoanti. The Shoanti homeland was once the fertile river basins south of the Storval Plateau, the area controlled by modern-day Corvosa. During the Everwar expansion of the Chelish Empire, the Shoanti were forced from their homes, and by 4488 they were pushed northwards into a harsh desert called the Cinderlands. Over the last 250 years, the Shoanti have made the Cinderlands their home, but despite surviving and building permanent settlements in these harsh lands, many of them have not made peace with this cruel history and remain oath-sworn to someday retake what they've lost. Shoanti skin tones vary widely, and they typically range from sepia to russet, and clan or qua members are easily identified by their shaved heads and traditional tattoos. As youth, Shoanti must undergo a rite of passage before they are considered an adult. Upon completing this trial, they are granted their first tattoo, each of which is specific to an individual's tribe. At this time, Shoanti youth are also given their full name, a phrase that is generally an honorific that will become the individual's most commonly used title. As they continue to acquire merit and accomplishments, so too does their collection of honorific tattoos grow with them. Shoanti as a whole embrace a wide range of religious beliefs, including ancestor worship, totemism, and the veneration of traditional gods such as Desna, Gorum, Gosre, and Pharasma. Despite their common heritage, the 7 clans of the Shoanti are quite different from one another in terms of traditions, beliefs, and overall worldviews. The Moon clan are said to be among the best archers and hunters of the Shoanti people. Along the Kazaron River and the Storval Deep Lake, the hardy, proud, seafaring Axe clan are expert divers and fishermen, and remain extremely territorial and mistrustful of outsiders. The Hawk clan possesses the strongest animal affinity, and revere the hunting bird they share their lands with as holy and mystic. The Hawk clan is perhaps the most peaceful of the Quas, and they serve as the emissaries to the outside world. The Spire clan act as mediators between the clans. Their primary ambition is to see the Shoanti unified as a single people, despite the differences that separate the 7 Quas. The Sun Clan are the fiercest of the Shoanti, and have held the line against the orcs of Belkzen since moving into the Cinderlands. The Sun Clan have learned to use the heat and fire of the Cinderlands itself as a weapon, and they revere the horse above all other animals. The bone-decorated Skull Clan both track the oral history of the Shoanti people and act as spiritual guardians for the deceased. They often worship Pharasma, and seek out any areas where the dead are restless, and will fight the undead to return those spirits to rest. Despite their value to the clans, even other Shoanti often find the Skull Clan members unsettling. Finally, the secluded Wind Clan can be found in the mountains of northwestern Varisia, near the lands of the Linorm kings. The Varisians of these lands know them as barbarian raiders who descend from the mountains only when they need to resupply for the winter. Korvosans use the derogatory term horsers for the Shoanti, and Shoanti are generally seen as rude, uncivilized barbarians by most of Varisian society. Playing a Shoanti can cover a lot of the same thematic ground as playing a Kellid, a proud people of a long and ancient heritage who have been forced from their land by invading conquerors. From physical appearance to the skilled horse riding to the clan structure, the real-world analog for the Shoanti are Native Americans. So for names and other possible character inspiration, one might want to research the myths and stories of America's indigenous peoples. Now, let's discuss the Varisians. Varisians can be found traveling throughout Avestan, but are most prevalent in their ancient homeland of Varisia, in their adopted homeland of Ustalav, and in the human-dominated lands west of Lake Incarthan, Lastwall, near Mathas, and Malthun. Varisians were traditionally known as a nomadic culture, who rarely settled down for any length of time, and considered all of Golarion to be their home. Despite this preconception, just as many now live sedentary lifestyles in numerous settlements across Avestan, most notably Varisia and Ustalav. Those who continue their nomadic lifestyle generally traverse Avestan in family groups or clans, either on foot or in their well-known brightly colored wagons. Among the traveling and settled Varisian communities, one commonly finds small insular communities who are known to focus on themselves and often advantage themselves and their adopted family and community by engaging in some nonviolent crimes such as pickpocketing, robbery, or confidence schemes. These crime families are called the Zarni, and unfortunately the existence of the Zarni has unfairly conferred upon Varisians the unfortunate reputation of being thieves or scoundrels among non-Varisians. The Varisian people typically possess deep olive-colored skin and long hair that comes in an incredibly large range of colors, from platinum to the darkest black. In fact, no one hair color is considered unusual among them. They often have large, expressive eyes that come in a variety of colors, such as violet or gold. Varisian attire tends to be loose and colorful, and some wear a special scarf called a capenia that traces an individual's lineage through both mother and father as far back as family knowledge stretches. Body adornment is also quite common among Varisians, and many carry intricate tattoos as well. Varisians pay homage to a wide variety of deities, but are most commonly associated with Desna, the goddess of travel. Depending on their outlook and needs, they frequently also worship Abadar, Calistria, Caden Kalian, Erastil, Gosre, Sarenrae, Shaelin, or even in some cases darker gods like Norgorber or Urgathoa. In addition to traditional deity worship, many Varisians consider visiting a harrower to be a key part of their spiritual practice. Harrowers are specialized fortune tellers that draw power from a mystical Varisian deck of cards known as the Harrow. They can lay out these cards in special ways to interpret a person's future. The obvious real-world analog for the Varisian people are the Romani people, a nomadic people with diaspora populations located around the world. This, however, is not a totally apt analogy, as only a small percentage of Varisians in Golarion are actually nomadic, or live in diaspora communities. In my games, I tend to make the distinction between three main groups of Varisians: settled Varisians, nomadic Varisians, and Zarni. Nomadic Varisians are the closest to real-world Romani, while the Zarni, with their sophisticated criminal networks, have no real-world analog and fill niche roles in my campaign, sometimes as villains, or even in other situations as unlikely allies. Settled Varisians, however, I treat as a less homogeneous and more ethnically mixed people, because, when you think about it, contemporary Varisian lands, like Ustalav and Varisia, were colonies of Taldor and Cheliax respectively, and also because of mixing with Kellids, Shoanti, and Ulfen populations would have occurred in these lands as well. In this regard, a settled Varisian can be whatever the player wants them to be, and there is a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of both physical appearance and cultural mores. For players that are relatively new to role-playing, this option gives them a lot of space to craft their own identity without the burden of too much detail to learn about these characters. Moving just south of Varisia is a nation called Nidal. The Nidalese hail from a culture that escaped destruction during the Earthfall Cataclysm. The ancient Nidalese pledged fealty to an evil shadow god to obtain salvation, and the grip of Zon Kuthon, the Midnight Lord, has tainted these people ever since. Nidalese people tend towards grey, ashy skin tones, with white, grey, or black hair. They may have pale eyes, or even eyes of dark yellow, amber, or red. There's no real-world analog for the Nidalese in our world, because there's no such thing as a shadow god, but the Nidalese are the human equivalent of the Drow, dark elves, or the Duergar, dark dwarves, or the Zvirfnebli, dark gnomes. Essentially, they are a people that show visible physical manifestations of their corruption. The pale skin, faded or grey hair, and strange eyes are shaped by generations of connection to this dark power, but they have no real bearing on the disposition of a specific individual. A Nidalese character may reject this dark origin as much as they may embrace it. Playing a Nidalese character, much like playing the dark kindred of a different ancestry, is to play a character that will put NPCs on edge. They may make false assumptions about the character's religion and practices. A Nidalese character may be viewed as creepy or untrustworthy outside of Nidal. Because of this, playing a heroic Nidalese character might require you to be a little extra virtuous, just to be considered as heroic as the other PCs. All in all, these can make really interesting and compelling player characters. Before we move south to Cheliax and Taldor, there are a few more ethnicities that are worth talking about. The Iobarian people are a human ethnicity originating from northwestern Kazmarin and northeastern Avestan, specifically found in the nations of Brevoy, Mendev, and the ruins of Iobaria. Descended from Ulfen explorers, Iobarians are seen by many in Avestan and Garand as humans from Kazmarin who are neither Kelishite nor Kazmar. Based on their naming conventions, I believe Iobarians are meant to represent a Slavic people. Finally, there is a rare ethnicity that I kind of skipped over when I talked about Irisin. In Irisin, one may run into the Jadwiga. All Jadwiga trace their ancestry to one of the witch queens of Irisin, and to their common mother, the ancient witch Baba Yaga. They have an affinity for ice magic, they're pale and white-haired, and they frequently have blue or sea-green eyes. There's no real-world analog to these because they have sort of a fantastical origin. Believe it or not, that's all the time we got for today. Unfortunately, the human content is too deep, too complex, too long, so I've had to cut my video in half. So I'm dropping off here, and next week we'll deal with Taldor and Cheliax. We'll go south into Garand. We'll move east into Tianxia. All of that content coming to you next week. If you like this video and you're enjoying it, be sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.